Christmas, it turns out, is just around the corner. In our wider community, it's time for gathering with family and friends. In this darkness of winter, we find a little extra cheer, perhaps, with Christmas lights. And many people show others how they care by giving special gifts. For our Christian neighbors, Christmas comes with a very particular story and a very particular theological idea. The story of Christmas is a deep dive into how once upon a time God lived on earth as a person. I hope you'll join me for a moment in exploring that idea. In our Unitarian Universalist tradition, we learn from all sorts of different stories and sources. What can we learn from our Christian neighbors and this idea of God being born as a person? What is this about that's been so compelling for so many people for so long? We Unitarian Universalists use very broad theological language. The name of the theology that most resonates with my belief is called a minimalist vision of transcendence. It's okay. No one knows what that means. For others may hold a concept of God that is usually something like spirit of life or great mystery, love, creative power of the universe. We avoid any specific name. We certainly avoid a location or a particular body. And the Christmas story is about the exact opposite. The story says that the eternal was born into human flesh at a particular point in history. In that person, there was a gender and a cultural identity. He spoke very particular words, a living, breathing human being. The story and the good news all starts with a baby. And who doesn't love a baby? Well, anyone who has traveled with one behind them in an airplane. That's who. Yes, babies are beautiful and awe-inspiring. They can also be jerks, I'm told. They sometimes smell terribly bad, and they wake up at all hours. They don't contribute much to a household. They just kind of absorb attention. All of us can attest to the clear beauty and sacredness of an infant. It raises a critical question. How could the eternal, the infinite, the holy be contained in something so incredibly limited and vulnerable? And how could God be so messy and completely irrational? The story, as it is told in the Gospels, actually doesn't start with a baby. The story starts with a pregnant teenager who receives the terrifying news of a surprise pregnancy. Second only to infancy, teen years may be perhaps the most awkward of our life cycle. No one ever talks about Mary having pimples, or being anxious or navigating sexual desire for the first time. It's scandalous stuff. But this is where we're invited to consider God growing out of. The Christmas story offers a chunk of theology for us to consider deeply. Is it possible that God doesn't just shape human life, but that God is also vulnerable to this chaotic world? I use the Christmas story because it's coming up. We don't have to turn to our Christian heritage to shine a light on the sacredness of human life. Humanism, that's deeply woven into our tradition, tells us that our human thriving, especially in community, is a uniquely special thing in existence. It's worthy of our utmost attention. We can take it from our Unitarian Universalist commitment to affirm the inherent worth and dignity of every person. And you really don't even need a tradition to see or experience the sacredness of a human life. We can take it from our own eyes and our own hearts, that deep knowing when we are occasionally blessed to be in the presence of an infant child. That beautiful, fragile, maybe loud and a little stinky, but innocent bundle of hope and opportunity. That is holiness in the flesh. Today, as we talk about being present, about showing up, bringing our whole selves to a hurting world, I want to put on the table our belief that the person in front of us is the most holy thing in the world. What might we learn from showing up and being curious about the unique way that the sacred shines through that individual person? What would it be like to walk in the world where billboards and digital screens and podcasts and calendar reminders take a back seat while we fully show up to our neighbors? On Wednesday this past week, a handful of Tapestry members went to a meeting hosted by the organization CLUE, that's Clergy and Laity United for Economic Justice. The meeting was convened by faith communities and partners to talk about how we might prepare for the threat of mass deportation or inhumane immigration enforcement. There were probably 30 to 50 people at the meeting. I went because a few immigrants who I am personally worried about, and because I have heard from Tapestry a chorus of, what are we going to do? There's a lot of anxiety in the air. With the threat of mass deportation, the moment of American history that keeps getting referred to is the arrest and incarceration of people of Japanese descent during World War II. That came up pretty early in our meeting on Wednesday. Most of you know the general history. Early in World War II, the United States forcibly relocated and incarcerated 120,000 people of Japanese descent in 10 concentration camps. Most of the camps were located in the western interior United States. Pretty harsh climate if you've taken a road trip. Manzanar is the closest of those camps. It's in the eastern Sierra Nevada mountains near Lone Pine or Mount Whitney. About 2/3 of the incarcerated people were United States citizens. The action was initiated by Executive Order 9066 by President Franklin D. Roosevelt on February 19th, 1942. This was just a couple of months after the outbreak of war with Japan in December of 1941. This week, I wanted to learn more about not just what happened, but the response. Where were the Americans saying, we're better than this? Answering that question isn't super straightforward. The United States public did generally accept the order. Residents of the West Coast, presumably fearing Japanese military strikes, were especially supportive of the internment. But not everyone was on board. Even within his administration, FDR was getting mixed messages about how legal this was, which it was not, and how effective it would be, which it was not. Maybe it was the impact of racism layered with fear of war at the time, but few people felt able to really speak out on the issue. Even liberal newspapers like the New York Times offered little critique of this moment. A few individual journalists in less influential papers wrote editorials on the issue. It was the American Civil Liberties Union, though, that was the major player pushing FDR to change the policy. It was in particular the president of the ACLU, Roger Baldwin. He pointed out how illegal this was and pointed out how dangerous it was, how unchecked the military's authority was, that they could begin sweeping other violations of civil liberties in this wartime. It set a terrible precedent. Now, it's worth interjecting here that there's a difference between the illegality of FDR's Executive Order 9066 and what the Trump administration threatens. Non-citizens are not protected by the U.S. Constitution and are vulnerable to incredibly subjective interpretation of immigration law. Attorneys will fight like hell to protect them, but their legal rights are much hazier than the protections that should have guaranteed the freedom of Japanese American citizens. Now, even while the ACLU fought against the order, the organization itself was split on the issue. Large portions of the organization believed that this wasn't a fight that they should take up. It was just too much. I was relieved to find that the Unitarian minister, Reverend John Haynes Holmes, was one of the supporters within the ACLU pushing to continue the fight against the executive order. I would like to say that he was representative of our whole faith tradition, but John Haynes Holmes was a bit of a radical, even among Unitarians. There were also many West Coast Christian and Jewish leaders who vocally opposed the internment. The Christian Century, the religious magazine, encouraged churches to prepare to work to protect the rights of Japanese Americans. And it's no surprise that African Americans and Jewish Americans identified personally with what was going on. What happened with the internment of Japanese people was a tragedy. It was also accompanied by some stories of solidarity and resistance. It's a complicated history that is still unfolding today. I wanted to share more of that history today as a demonstration of how easily these moments in history get oversimplified. They become alarm bells that invoke fear and panic. Never forget September 11th. Never forget the Holocaust. Remember the internment of Japanese Americans. The January 6th attempted insurrection. All of these moments in history are worth remembering, not as a one-line call to arms, but as times when we struggled deeply, when we were tested. There are many layers of oppression and resistance, fear and solidarity, times that are way more nuanced than a bumper sticker can convey. Over this past Thanksgiving, I was with my family in Oklahoma for about a week. Fortunately, we're all generally of a similar political mind. Unfortunately, that meant hearing a series of at least 7 conversations focusing on stoking fears and wringing our hands and deepening a sense of helplessness post-election. Mind you, these are all middle-class, college-educated, white senior citizens with disposable income and lots of time on their hands. So much worry and frustration and powerlessness. Finally, I had listened to the rehashing of this conversation one too many times. Over dinner, I said, okay, what are you going to do about it? Are you donating to a political party that you support? Are you going to your school board meetings or your city council meetings? Are you joining the League of Women Voters? Did you participate in efforts to get out the vote? Are you supporting Planned Parenthood or PFLAG or the ACLU? Are you talking to your neighbors? And I realize maybe you all, Tapestry, has ruined my patience for complaining from the sidelines. Obviously, none of us is going to do all the things, but I found that I couldn't sit and listen to my very privileged family complain any longer if they weren't taking some action, showing up in some way for the issues that they were concerned about. Most of us at Tapestry are in the position of being allies in social justice. We're in the position to show up for our neighbors, to listen and to learn and to act. But we do not do our neighbors any favors by telling them to be more afraid. Remember, African Americans were not nearly as surprised when Trump won the election, this time or last time. Our transgender siblings already know that they are in the crosshairs of a culture war. And our immigrant friends are plenty afraid already without us sharing our hysterics. The folks who are most at risk for violence and injustice have already survived trauma. Expecting them to carry the dismay of all of liberal America is just not fair. Our job is to show up, to listen deeply, amplify the voices of those most impacted, and be a resource. Courage, money, skills, connection, those are the resources to share. There is plenty of fear and chaos already. So if you need to vent, if you need to express your fear, please don't lay it on the people most directly impacted. Talk to another Tapestry member or talk to me and find some small way to step outside of yourself. More and more, I'm realizing that making a difference is really about a holistic approach. Finding the little pieces here and there that add up. Not that we have to do all the things all the time. You don't have to stand on the street corner with your megaphone wearing your handmade, organically grown cotton garments covered with bumper stickers. In fact, please don't. It would be insufferable here. We can't do that. But what would it look like if we did fully live into our deepest values at all of those moments of choice, those small choices and conversations? The foods we choose, the things we buy, the media we consume, the friendships we foster. Each of them is an opportunity. A handful of us read the Book of Hope by Jane Goodall and co-author Douglas Abrams. Jane Goodall talks at length and gives incredible examples of hope, but one of the striking things about the book was she said that she doesn't believe in luck or in fate, she believes in opportunity. She tells the story of finding herself seated next to what she thought was a stranger on an airplane trip who happened to be an attorney, just the person that she needed to farther an environmental protection policy where she was headed. Jane Goodall said she doesn't believe in luck or fate, but she believes in opportunities and taking the opportunities in front of us. So many tiny opportunities to build the life we want every day. So this month, as we explore the theme of presence, I invite us to show up to the opportunities, show up to our holy neighbors, the holy born into flesh and bone. And let us continue to be a people who show up for our world. Amen.